Mom, this is really just a family matter. We'll fill you in later. Okay. Aurora stood at the doorway of James's study, her arms crossed, her expression clipped and resolute. She didn't yell, she didn't push, but her presence was a blockade, and I wasn't welcome on the other side of it. My own daughter, shutting me out of the very room where my husband and I had shared decades of our life, now discussing what came after him, as though I were no longer part of it. But I am family, I said, so softly I wasn't sure she even heard me. James was my husband. Aurora. Her sigh was tired. Rehearsed. Yes. But we need to approach this practically. Richard understands the financial details better than anyone. We just need a clean conversation without emotional complications. Emotional complications? That's what I was now, after 45 years beside James, his partner, his wife, his confidant. I had become a liability in their tidy estate plan. I glanced past her shoulder. Richard was inside, spreading out papers on James's old desk. The desk James used to polish every Sunday. The one he refused to replace even when the corners dulled. And now it held forms and numbers and cold calculations about my life. Please, Mom, Aurora added, softening her voice like icing over a bitter pill. We won't be long. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't find a word strong enough to hold the weight in my chest. She closed the door. And just like that, I was outside, standing in the hallway of a home that still smelled like James's cologne in the linen closet, where every wall whispered memories, where every photo held a version of our love. 3 weeks. That's all it had been since the funeral. And yet somehow, they'd already begun packing away not just his things but me too. Have you ever felt quietly pushed out of something that once belonged to you? If you're still here, still listening, then Tenacity Tales just wants you to know you're not alone. Where are you listening from? What emotion brushed past your heart just now? Share a little in the comments. We'd love to hear you. Just as you're hearing this story. And if this space feels gentle to you, maybe subscribe. So next time a new story begins, you'll already be here. I walked to the kitchen. Not because I was hungry, not even because I wanted tea, but because that space had always been mine. Through storms and sickness, birthdays and burned dinners, that kitchen had anchored me. 45 years of stirring soup, chopping herbs, hearing James whistle some Sinatra tune as he leaned against the counter. The floor tiles, those gray and cream ones, we'd laid them ourselves in our 10th year of marriage. The herb garden on the windowsill still bloomed as if he'd be home any moment, ready to compliment my rosemary chicken. But he wouldn't. Not ever again. I filled the kettle, the sound of running water loud in the silence he left behind. From down the hall, muffled voices still rose, Aurora's voice now sharp, now sweet, leading. Her words no longer curled with hesitation like they did when she was younger. She was decisive, firm, controlled. And for the first time, I wondered when she had become this woman I no longer recognized. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the kettle on the stove, and suddenly, a memory returned. One that had been buried beneath funeral flowers and casseroles and sleepless nights. 6 months ago, James had sat across this very table, his body thinner, his skin pale, but his eyes still fiercely. James. He reached for my hand. Debbie? He said quietly. I've changed the will. Please. Not now. I had whispered. Let's not talk about endings. We have to. He replied. I need you to be ready. Aurora's just worried. I had insisted. Like any mother would. She loves us. She wants to help. But James had only looked at me soft, but unyielding. She's changed. He said, promise me you'll be strong. And I had. He promised him. But I hadn't known then what he meant. I hadn't known what was coming. Back in the kitchen now. That promise felt like a thread tightening around my chest. Everything in me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. That maybe I was imagining it all. But James had known. He had seen it coming. And he had prepared me even when I didn't want to see. The kettle whistled, pulling me back. I poured hot water over a tea bag and watched the color seep into the cup slow. Steady. Quiet. And then I remembered. The key. 2 weeks before he passed, James had pressed a tiny key into my palm. His fingers cold but deliberate. Only after I'm gone, he'd whispered, "When you see who they really are." At the time, I didn't ask questions. I couldn't. It felt too final. Too much like giving up on hope. But now, standing alone in the home we built together, I was beginning to understand. Tomorrow, I would go. I would open the safe deposit box. And I would find out what James had left behind, not just for me to have, but for me to finally see. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in morning black, not in soft pastels, but in navy blue, James's favorite, the kind of color that made me feel anchored. At the bank, the manager greeted me with a practiced smile and escorted me down a quiet hallway. Metal doors lined the walls, each one a vault of secrets. She inserted her key. I inserted mine. A soft click, and the door opened. Inside the safe deposit box was a large manila envelope, thick and neatly sealed. My name was written across the front, in James's unmistakable handwriting, sharp, slanted. Careful, I held it with both hands, as if it were a part of him. And maybe, in some way, it was. In a private room, I sat at a polished table and slowly peeled back the flap. Inside were 3 things. First, a freshly notarized will, dated 6 months ago. I unfolded it, scanning the language that was so formal and yet so personal. James had left everything to me. The house, the investments, every account. Aurora wasn't left out, but her share was far smaller and strictly conditional. I had to read the paragraph twice, because just last week, Aurora had told me I'd receive a modest allowance from the trust, just enough for my care, as if I were some aging dependent, not his wife of 45 years. The second item in the envelope was a letter, a handwritten one. The third, a small USB drive, labeled, in James's handwriting, "Watch this first." But it was the folder tucked at the very back that made my stomach drop. Inside were pages of financial documents, loan papers, bank forms, credit applications, all with my name on them, and my signature, except I had never signed any of them. Not a single one. I stared at the handwriting, pretending to be mine. The looping D's, the careful R's, they were good, convincing, even, but they weren't mine. And James had known it. Had they been planning this for months? Years? How many smiles had Aurora offered me while forging my name behind closed doors? I stood slowly, every breath feeling heavier than the last. I needed to get home. I needed to see what was on that drive. Because now, I wasn't just grieving, I was waking up. The house was empty when I returned. Aurora had mentioned something vague about meeting with a realtor. Back then, I thought it was just an offhand comment. Now, it felt like a thread in a much darker weave. I locked the front door behind me, then walked straight to James's study. The computer still sat where he left it, dust on the screen, his favorite pen beside the mouse pad. I hesitated only a moment before plugging in the USB drive. There was one file, just one. I clicked it, and then, there he was. James. Thinner, paler, his cheeks hollowed by illness, but his eyes, His eyes were still him. Still kind. Still fierce. Debbie. My love. His voice filled the room. If you're watching this, then it means I'm gone. Tears blurred my vision. But I didn't look away. I wish I didn't have to leave this burden on your shoulders. He continued. But you deserve to know the truth. He explained everything. How he had discovered their plan almost a year earlier. How Aurora and Richard had been making slow, calculated moves collecting documents. Changing passwords. Suggesting convenient updates to accounts. They talked about putting you in assisted living. He said softly. Not because you needed it, but because it made the house easier to sell. I covered my mouth. I remembered. Aurora once casually mentioning how nice the place at Sunny Pines was. How it had great amenities for someone your age. At the time, I thought it was just concern. Now I saw it differently. James's voice trembled slightly. I confronted Aurora. He said, she denied everything. She said she was just helping us stay organized. But then, he found the forged signatures, loan applications, withdrawals, credit cards he'd never seen before under my name. They've already borrowed nearly $200. Ling, he said, using your identity. I gasped. Aurora's new car, the vacation home, the endless projects Richard said they were juggling. It all made sense now. I changed the will that same week. James said, everything is now in your name. With protections in place, he told me the will was filed with Walter Griffin, that the USB held the proof I needed. The video ended with James pausing, like he was searching for the right last words. They underestimated you, Debbie, he said. But I never did. Then the screen went black, but I sat there, frozen, staring at his last message to me, the last time I would hear his voice. And I finally understood James didn't just leave me his belongings. He left me a shield. The next time Aurora came by, she didn't knock. Her key turned in the lock like it belonged there. Like she belonged there more than I did. I was in the study, James's study. Now, mine. Still, in the chair where I'd watched his final video, still holding the truth like a secret fire in my chest. Mom Aurora called out brightly. You home, she appeared at the doorway. Her usual poise dimmed just slightly when she saw me at the desk. James's desk. What are you doing in here, she asked. Smile thin. I looked up. Calm. Just remembering. I said, James loved this room. Her smile returned. A little too quick. I know. I know you miss him. She came inside. Settled herself on the edge of the desk, making herself comfortable. Claiming space. The way people do when they feel ownership. Actually, she continued, I'm glad I caught you. Richard and I were talking. And we think it might be time to start thinking about selling the house. Just like that. No warm-up. No questions. Just a suggestion dropped in my lap like a stone. Selling. I repeated. She nodded, clasping her hands like someone delivering news from a place of concern. It's just so much space for you. Mom. Too many stairs. Too much maintenance. We're only thinking about your comfort. I said nothing. Just watched her. Because this time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't naive. We've actually looked into a retirement community near us. She went on. You'd have your own little apartment. Lots of activities. People your age. It'd be so much better than rattling around this old place alone. She reached for my hand softly. Deliberately. The kind of gesture that used to feel like love, but now it felt like a transaction. She wasn't seeing me. She was managing me. And I realized something chilling. She truly believed this was for the best. Not for me. But for them, I'm not ready to leave this home. I said quietly. Her smile thinned. Just a crack. Of course, No one's rushing you. We're just trying to plan ahead. The market's great right now. And honestly, Dad would have wanted us to be practical. There it was again. That phrase, Dad would have wanted. I wondered what she'd say if she knew what he really wanted. What he had really feared. Richard's meeting with the financial advisor tomorrow. She added, "We'll go over your monthly expenses, make sure the transition's smooth." Transition. I repeated. She smiled like it was all so reasonable. From Dad handling things to us. I nodded slowly. Let her think I was still the woman she could steer. But inside me, something had shifted. Not broken. Not snapped. Just clicked into place. I wasn't the one being moved anymore. I was watching the movers. They arrived like it was a business appointment. First, Aurora leading with confidence, heels clicking across my floor like punctuation marks. Then Richard, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. And finally Bernard, their financial advisor, carrying a sleek leather portfolio that said more than his smile did. I waited in the kitchen, calm on the outside. Still, but inside, I was gathering every ounce of resolve James had left me. "Mom, we're here," Aurora called out, letting herself in with the key she had copied without asking. I poured tea. Let them wait a moment. Then, I stepped into the dining room, my dining room, and took my place at the head of the table. They'd already laid out papers. I hadn't even sat down. And already, my future was being arranged around me like a business plan. "Mom," Aurora began, sliding into her rehearsed tone. "We've been working on a plan to make sure everything's taken care of." Richard pushed a paper toward me. "We've calculated a monthly allowance. 800 should cover your basic needs, utilities, groceries, prescriptions, the essentials." I looked down at the figure. Not shocked? I'd expected this. "This allowance is based on the current returns from Dad's investments," Richard added, "minus management fees and maintenance." My voice was quiet. "You mean the same investments that bring in over $12? Oh, $0 a month." The room paused. Bernard blinked. Aurora shifted. Then came the smile forced. Polite. Defensive. "There are expenses. Mom. Repairs. Taxes. The house until we sell it." "Of course." "And the loans?" I asked. Calm. Almost gentle. All three froze. Richard's hand stopped mid-reach for another folder. Aurora's face drained. Then flushed. "What loans?" she asked too quickly. I pulled out a small stack of papers and laid them neatly on the table. Loan applications. Credit card accounts. 2 home equity lines. "These ones," I said, tapping the forged signatures. "All in my name. None of which I signed." Richard recovered first. "Debbie, you signed these during Dad's illness. Don't you remember? It was a stressful time." "Stop." My voice was steel. "I never signed a single one of these. And we both know it." Aurora leaned forward. Mask slipping. "Dad asked us to help manage things. He knew you couldn't handle it all. He trusted us. He trusted me enough to change the will." I said, looking her straight in the eye. Silence. Then Aurora's expression hardened. No more softness. No more sugar. "You turned him against me," she snapped. "After everything we've done for you, done for me," I whispered. "You forged my name, took my money, planned to put me in a facility." Her voice rose. "You can't live alone. You're forgetful. Confused. You need supervision." And there it was. The truth they'd been dressing up in concern. "I'm grieving," I said. "Not incapable. And there's a difference." Bernard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Perhaps We should step back and stay. Richard interrupted. This is all just confusion. She's not herself. Grief causes paranoia. I have the will. I said it quietly. But it landed like thunder. Aurora's lips parted. Richard froze. The real will? I clarified. Not the version you pretend exists. I turned to Bernard. Did they tell you James left them power of attorney, full control, yes? Bernard nodded hesitantly. That was my understanding. They lied. I placed the notarized copy of the will in front of them. Everything. The house, the accounts, the rights to decide anything about my care, all left to me. Aurora stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. This isn't over. She hissed. That will can be contested. You'll regret this. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my daughter. Just someone wearing her face. The only thing I regret, I said, is that your father had to learn who you truly were before he died. And even that truth, I carried gently. Walter's office smelled like old books and fresh ink. I sat in a navy suit, clean, pressed, steady. James always said blue made me look like I knew things. No one else did. Today, I believed it. Robert sat beside me. His presence quiet but firm. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. At 9:58, the door opened. Aurora swept in, dressed in black like the grieving daughter from a stage play. Richard followed, tight-lipped and polished. Mom, Aurora said, her voice soft and sugary. You look, well, I smiled. Calm. Let's begin. Walter adjusted his glasses. Thank you all for coming. We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Mr. James Reynolds. Legal phrases. Formalities. But I was watching faces. Aurora's. Trying to stay relaxed. Richard's. Twitching with calculation. They still thought they had control. Before we proceed, Walter said, Mr. Reynolds included a personal letter to be read aloud first. He requested it be read in its entirety. Is that really necessary? Aurora interrupted. Too quickly. We all know how he felt. Walter didn't answer her. He simply opened the envelope and began to read. To my family, he began. If you are hearing this, I am gone. But my voice remains. All my life, I've tried to live by 3 principles: honesty, integrity, and loyalty. And I have held those closest to me to the same standard. Aurora shifted. Richard crossed his arms. It has brought me deep sorrow to discover that not all those I loved held the same values in return. The room fell quiet. In the months before my death, I uncovered efforts to mislead, manipulate, and control my wife and her future. I found falsified documents, secret meetings, financial exploitation. Aurora pálida. Richard clenched his jaw. Walter read on. Because of this, I changed my will, not out of vengeance, but to protect what matters most, my wife, Debbie, and to leave behind not only wealth, but clarity. When the letter ended, Walter placed it down with care. Aurora's hand was trembling. This is absurd, she muttered. He was confused, sick. He wasn't himself. Actually, Walter said. Mr. Reynolds underwent 2 separate cognitive assessments before revising his will. Both confirmed he was of sound mind. Then Walter began to read the will itself. One line after another. The house, the accounts, the investments, all to me. Aurora would receive a conditional inheritance 10 years from now, and only if she remained in legal good standing with me. This is insane, Richard shouted. You expect us to accept this. It doesn't require your acceptance. Walter said. Only your recognition. Aurora turned to me. Voice breaking. Mom, please. You know we were just trying to help. You know we were doing our best. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small recorder James left me. Then why did you say this? I asked. And pressed play. Once Dad's gone, we move fast. Get her to sign over power of attorney while she's still grieving. If she resists, we start documenting slips, missed appointments, forgetfulness. Build a case. Aurora's voice. Clear. Cold. Then Richard's. The house goes up for sale by summer. We pay off the debt. Move her into Sunny Pines. Studio unit's fine. She won't need much space. Silence. Bernard looked stunned. There's more, I said softly. James was very thorough. Aurora stood so quickly, the chair scraped backward. You planned this. You manipulated him. You poisoned him against us. I stood. Steady. Unflinching. No, I said. You did that yourself. Sometimes, the truth only shows itself when the one who protected you is gone. If you've listened this far, maybe you too have felt misjudged, overlooked. Share where you're listening from and what this story is stirring in you. And if you'd like to keep walking with us, Tenacity Tales will be here. Softly just hit subscribe, and you won't miss the next chapter when it comes. 3 days passed. Not a word. No calls. No visits. No dramatic doorstep confrontations. Just silence. But it wasn't the kind that crushed you. It was the kind that cleared the fog. I moved through the house slowly, like someone entering a museum of her own life. Every photo, every drawer, every item they'd once touched now felt like it belonged only to me. For the first time in months, I could breathe without checking the air for their presence. The locks had been changed. Walter had taken over all legal communication. I no longer had to hear their voices explain away betrayal with concern. You're grieving. You're confused. We're just trying to help. No. They were trying to erase me bit by bit, signature by signature. But James had seen it coming. He hadn't told me everything at once, because he knew I wouldn't believe it. Not until I saw it for myself. And now I had. Every last piece. Walter called the morning after the will reading. There's something else you need to see, he said. James left one more folder. I didn't realize how extensive it was. I met him at his office. He slid a thick file across the desk. Photos, statements, typed transcripts. James hadn't just gathered evidence. He had built a case. James had been methodical. That was the first thing I realized as I opened the thick folder Walter handed me. Every page, every image, every note dated, labeled, cross-referenced. Not a disparate act. Not paranoia. It was preparation. In one photograph, Aurora and Richard sat at a cafe, deep in discussion with a woman I didn't recognize. In another, they were walking through a senior living facility, smiling. And then there was a third photo that stopped my breath. They were standing in our bedroom, my bedroom, taking inventory. While I had been at a doctor's appointment, I clenched the folder tighter. He hired a private investigator. Walter confirmed quietly. Started about 7 months ago. He had suspicions and didn't want to confront them until he had everything documented. I turned to one of the typed pages. Transcribed conversations. Times. Dates. Names. And there near the bottom was a name that made something inside me go cold. Carla Matthews. Geriatric Care Evaluator. Who is she? I asked. Even though I already feared the answer. Walter Seihe. She specializes in competency evaluations. Often called when families want to pursue guardianship over elderly relatives. It hit me like a punch. They hadn't just been planning to sell the house. They were building a case, a legal path to declare me mentally unfit, to take over my life legally. All those little moments began to make sense. Mom, do you remember where you left your keys? You already told me that yesterday. You've been forgetting a lot lately. They hadn't been concern. They were evidence collection. I closed the folder, my hands shaking slightly. James hadn't told me. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he knew I wouldn't believe it until it was all laid bare. And now it was. Everything. The envelope was weathered. Robert pulled it from his coat pocket like it weighed more than paper. He placed it gently in my hands, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. James gave me this, he said, told me to hold on to it until the moment felt right. Inside was a single key and an address I didn't recognize. It's a storage unit, Robert added. He rented it about 6 months before he passed. Even I don't know what's inside. That afternoon, I drove to the edge of town. Industrial buildings, quiet roads. Unit 247 sat near the back, modest. Unassuming, I turned the key. What waited behind that metal door was James. Not in body, but in presence, in precision. Metal shelves lined the space, filled with carefully labeled boxes, finances, Aurora, early signs, our wedding, family vacations, and in the center, a whiteboard, covered in James's handwriting, dates, arrows, names, a 5-year timeline of everything he'd observed, every subtle manipulation, every odd transaction, every shift in tone. I walked slowly, fingertips brushing the words like they were skin. Then I saw it. A laptop, a note taped to the screen, the place we got engaged, plus the year we met. I smiled despite myself. North Point Lighthouse, 1970. The password. The computer unlocked instantly, and there dozens of folders, scans, emails, audio clips, charts. In one folder labeled Evidence, I found audio recordings, Aurora's voice, clear and strategic. She's so trusting. It'll be easy. We just move slow, make her think it's her idea. Then Richard, laughing. Your dad's the real obstacle. But not for long. Doctor said 6 months, max. We wait. Play nice. I paused the clip, breathing through nausea. They weren't just planning. They were waiting. Counting days, choreographing betrayal. Then I found it. A final video dated 2 weeks before James died. His face appeared thinner. Yes, but his eyes, they still burned with clarity. Debbie, he said softly, if you're seeing this, then you know. And I'm sorry. Sorry I had to spend my last months gathering files instead of holding your hand. But I couldn't leave without knowing you'd be protected. He took a breath. They underestimated you. They always have. But I haven't. When the video ended, I didn't cry. I just stood there, in that small metal box filled with truth and love. And one final gift, a map back to myself. I arrived 10 minutes early. Hair set, blouse crisp. James would have said I looked ready to win a war but polite enough to be invited to tea. Walter smiled as I entered the conference room. You look formidable, he said. I feel like I am, I replied. Robert was already there. Quiet as ever, my anchor in the storm. At exactly 9:58, they walked in. Aurora first, in a black dress that hugged her grief like a costume. Richard close behind. Jaw clenched, eyes scanning. They still thought they had a chance, that they could talk their way out of what was coming. Mom, Aurora said sweetly. You look well. I simply nodded. Walter opened the file and cleared his throat. Today, we gather for the official reading of Mr. Time, James Reynolds' last will and testament. But per his instruction, before we begin, I will read aloud a letter he wrote to accompany it. Aurora shifted in her seat. Do we have to? We all know how Dad felt. Walter ignored her and began. To my family. He read. If you are hearing this, I have left this world, but not without a voice. Throughout my life, I believed in truth, in loyalty, and in protecting those I love. In the final months of my life, I witnessed actions that betrayed those values by people I never expected. Aurora looked down. Richard's hands folded tighter. I discovered signatures forged in my wife's name, financial manipulation, and plans to take control of her life after my passing. I acted not in anger, but to ensure she would be protected. By the end, Aurora was pale. Then came the reading of the will, item by item. The house, the estate, the control of all assets, all to me. Aurora's share was conditional, a delayed inheritance 10 years, and only if no legal action was taken against me. This is insane, Richard barked. It's a trap. This isn't real, it's legal. Walter said calmly. Signed, witnessed, and accompanied by full mental competency assessments. Aurora turned to me, voice trembling. Mom, we didn't mean harm. We just wanted to make sure you were safe. We made mistakes. Yes. But I interrupted. Then why does this exist? I reached into my purse, placed the recorder on the table, pressed play. Once Dad's gone, we move fast. Get her to sign while she's still vulnerable. If she resists, we start documenting slips, missed meds, forgetfulness, enough to take control. Aurora's voice, sharp, cold, calculating. Then Richard's laughter. We'll have the house sold by summer. Her money pays the debts. Sunny Pines has small units. She won't need space. Bernard looked like the floor had dropped out beneath him. There's more, I said. James kept everything. Emails, photos, a timeline of every conversation. Aurora stood. You turned him against us. You twisted everything, no, I said, rising slowly. I didn't have to. I looked directly at her. You did it all by yourself. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't oppressive. It didn't wrap around me like grief. It just was. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, branches still scattered, but the sky clearing. Robert stopped by that afternoon. He didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. He just sat beside me in the sunroom, coffee in hand, eyes on the garden. She and Richard packed up the day after the reading. He said gently, moved out west, Phoenix. I think. I nodded. I already knew. The email had come through Bernard's assistant. Brief. Cold. All further communication will be through our legal representative. It hurt. Not the content, but the tone. As if I were a stranger. As if I'd broken something. But I hadn't broken it. I'd just uncovered the crack that had been there all along. Do you regret it? Robert asked quietly. I sipped my tea. The kind James used to call your storm-settling blend. No, I said. I don't. The truth cost me something, but not as much as the lie would have tampered. There was a weight in my chest. Yes, but it wasn't confusion anymore. It was grief made clean. I had spent too long doubting myself, too long making excuses for things that didn't feel right, too long loving someone who no longer loved me in return, not in the way a daughter should. And yet, I didn't hate her. That was the strangest thing. Even after everything. Even after the forged documents and the manipulations and the plan to tuck me away like an old photograph, a part of me still held her, not with arms anymore, but with memory. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly feeling better. There was no dramatic turning point. No music swelling in the background. Just one small thing. Then another. One day, I opened all the windows. The next, I moved James's favorite chair to the corner where the morning sun hit best. Then came the curtains, the heavy, brooding ones we had chosen in our 50s, replaced by sheer linen that danced with every breeze. I didn't ask anyone. I didn't explain. It was my house. And now, it finally felt like mine. I repainted the guest room, turned the formal dining room where we once held holiday dinners into an art studio. I found my old paints in a box marked Debbie, college. I hadn't touched them in over 30 years. But the smell of turpentine, the feel of the brush in my hand, it all came back like muscle memory from another life. Robert came by more often. Sometimes he brought almond croissants from the bakery we used to love. Sometimes just coffee. He never overstayed. But he always stayed long enough. "You've changed the place," he said once, looking around. "No," I replied, smiling. "I've just uncovered it." We didn't speak of Aurora. We didn't speak of James. Not because they weren't there, but because they were. In every brushstroke, in every turned page, in every cup of coffee that didn't taste quite the same without his hand nearby. The grief wasn't gone, but it no longer ruled the house. I was living again. Quietly, gently, but fully. And that, I thought one morning as I watered the herbs by the window, was more than enough. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. The mail had already arrived. Robert wouldn't come until Sunday. And Aurora, well, through the frosted glass, I saw a silhouette. Slim, nervous, young. When I opened the door, she offered a hesitant smile. "Hey, are you Mrs. Reynolds?" "Yes. I'm Lily. Lily Chun. I'm a student at the community college," Professor Walker said. "You might be willing to talk to me." He blinked. Caught off guard, she clutched a folder to her chest like it might fly away. "I'm working on a thesis," she added quickly, "about personal resilience, especially in women over 60, women who've endured things." There was something in her voice earnest, but familiar, like someone who hadn't just read about struggle, but had brushed it up close. I stepped aside. "Come in, Lily. We have coffee and leftover almond croissants. If you pretend not to like them." She laughed, surprised. It softened her immediately. We sat in the sunroom. She opened a notebook, her pen ready. But she waited for me to decide how much I was willing to give, and I gave her more than I expected. I told her about James, about Aurora, about the meeting I wasn't invited to, and the truth I almost didn't see, about grief, and clarity, and strength that came not like thunder, but like roots beneath soil. She wrote in silence, only nodding sometimes. "My mom and I don't speak," she said quietly. As we were finishing, 3 years now, I didn't ask why. She didn't offer, but I could feel the ache. "Do you ever think it's too late?" she asked. To go back, I looked at her, this young woman, standing at the edge of her own reckoning. "Sometimes," I said, "the door can remain open, but that doesn't mean you let people walk through it with muddy shoes." She smiled through eyes that shimmered. When she left, her notebook full, I realized I hadn't just told a story. I'd passed something on. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of healing. 2. The email arrived just after sunset. I was in the garden, watering the tulip bulbs I'd planted last week, the ones along the edge where James had once meant to build a bench. When I came back inside, I saw the notification. Just a name. Aurora Reynolds at Gmail. My hands stilled on the mouse. I didn't click right away. I stared at it, the name I'd written on birthday cakes, school forms, bandaged knees, and graduation cards. That name, now typed in sans serif, in a cold corner of a glowing screen. When I opened it, The message was short. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Richard and I are separating. I've started therapy. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'd like to call you sometime. If that's okay. There were no excuses. No justifications. Just a soft knock on a door she once tried to lock from the other side. I didn't cry. But I did breathe differently. I sat there. In the soft light of the study, James's study, now mine. I thought of the files. The recordings. The weight of betrayal. But I also thought of the child who once drew me pictures of rainbows and family, all of us holding hands. I opened a reply. Typed slowly. Carefully. Truthfully. I would like that very much. Your father once said, "It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." I believe that's true. For you, and for me. And as I pressed send, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the first green shoot breaking through the soil. It started with the curtains. Not the symbolic kind. Real ones. The thick, heavy ones that darkened the living room for years. I took them down. It took me an hour and a chair I wasn't sure I should be standing on. But once they were gone, the light came in like a silent guest who had been waiting patiently outside. I didn't stop there. The dining room, once used twice a year, became a studio. My easel fit perfectly by the window. The floor now bore tiny drops of blue and ochre paint, proof that something inside me had returned. I cleared the kitchen counter not just of clutter, but of the feeling that I was preserving someone else's order. James loved neatness. But this was mine now. My kind of lived in. I even rearranged the photos. Not out of resentment, but to make space both on the wall and in myself for who I was becoming. The house no longer felt like a monument. It felt like a home again. Not a home frozen in memory, but one slowly exhaling. There was grief still, of course. But now it sat beside me on the couch, instead of pressing down on my chest. Some nights, I lit a candle for James. Not out of sorrow, but as a way to thank him. He had made sure I'd be safe. And now, I was making sure I'd be me. Spring crept in softly, like Robert always did. Unannounced. But never unwelcome. He started coming by more often. Sometimes with almond croissants. Sometimes just with silence. He never rang the bell. Just knocked gently. Twice. Like he was saying, "Only if you're up for company?" And somehow, I always was. We'd sit in the garden or in the sunroom. Him with a paperback mystery. And me with my sketch pad or mug of tea. Sometimes we talked. About James. About books. About which flower bloomed too early. Sometimes we didn't. It never felt like filling the air. Only like keeping each other company through the quiet. He fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, the one I'd been ignoring for months. Replaced the screen on the back door so the mosquitoes wouldn't sneak in come summer. Little things. But they landed deep. One morning, I found a new bird feeder on the tree by the patio. A small handwritten note tucked inside the seed tray, cardinals like sunflower seeds. Thought you'd like a little more color out here. R. I smiled without realizing it. Then sat down to draw the feeder. The tree. And the red flash of feathers perched just above it. He never called it anything. What was between us? But I knew. He did too. It wasn't romance. It was something quieter. Something earned. Something gentle. Something like spring. She stood at the gate. Skinny jeans. Notebook clutched tight. Hair half falling from a messy bun. I didn't recognize her at first. Mrs. Reynolds. Her voice was soft. Like someone not used to interrupting. I'm Lily. I'm in Professor Walker's creative writing class. He said you might be willing to talk to me, I blinked. Then smiled. Oh. I said. Yes, he mentioned. Someone might stop by. We settled in the living room. Robert had just left minutes earlier, leaving behind the smell of fresh coffee and a quiet warmth. Lily perched on the edge of the couch, eyes wide behind her glasses. She held a pen like it might betray her. "I'm working on a thesis," she began, "on resilience in older women. Stories of truth. Of coming back to yourself after loss." Her voice trembled a little. She was younger than I thought, barely in her 20s. "And Professor Walker said your story was remarkable." I paused, looked at her. Just a girl, curious, kind, and maybe also someone trying to understand her own mother through someone else's. I picked up my tea. "I suppose it started with a meeting," I said. She leaned forward. "A meeting I wasn't invited to." And then I told her, not all at once, not like reading from a script, but slowly, gently, as one woman to another, about James, about Aurora, about Lise, and papers, and signatures that weren't mine, about a USB drive that broke my heart and saved my life, about learning, painfully, that love doesn't always protect us, but truth might. And she wrote, in fast loops and slow scrawls, as if trying to catch the shape of something too big for a single page. 2 hours passed. She hadn't noticed. When she finally closed her notebook, her eyes were wet. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the story. For the way you told it." I smiled, because in telling it, I realized it was no longer just a story about what was taken. It had become a story about what remained. After Lily left, the house felt both full and strangely quiet. Like it had just exhaled after holding its breath. She had taken her notebook. But something lingered. A thread of emotion left woven through the air. I found myself standing in front of the old bookshelf, the one where we used to keep Aurora's childhood books. I pulled one down, the Velveteen Rabbit. Pages softened with age, the spine a little loose. She used to beg me to read it, even when she could read it herself. "Make it sound like magic, Mom," she used to say. I traced the worn edges of the cover, wondering when she stopped asking me for stories, wondering when I stopped offering them. Lily had said something before leaving, casually, but with weight. "I haven't spoken to my mom in 3 years. Sometimes I wonder if too much damage has already been done." I didn't answer her then, but the words stayed, because I knew what she meant. Not the drama of it, but the quiet ache, the space between love and misunderstanding, between wanting to call and not knowing what to say. Did Aurora feel that too, or was she still angry, convinced I'd betrayed her by defending myself? The truth is, I still love her. That never changed. Even when she forged my name, even when she tried to erase me from my own life. But love isn't always enough. Not when trust has been broken so completely. Still, I found myself whispering, "Aurora, wherever you are, I hope you're okay." I didn't know if she would ever come back. Didn't know if I would or should let her in again. But one thing I knew for certain, the door would stay open. Not wide, not naively, but open just enough. Enough to let the light in, without letting anyone trample through me ever again. I stared at the blank page. The cursor blinked, patient, expectant. The study smelled faintly of cedar and ink, still carrying James's quiet presence in the corners. This room had once been his command post, where he organized finances, paid bills, read quietly with glasses perched on his nose. Now, it was mine. And today, I wasn't paying bills. I was writing a life. My life? I titled the file "The Last Legacy." It wasn't about money. Not really. It was about what James left behind, the things too often overlooked in a will. The protection, the foresight, the message, you have a right to your life. Even after it's been threatened. Especially after that, I didn't know where to begin. Not exactly. So I started with the moment everything cracked. During a meeting about my husband's inheritance, my daughter asked me to leave the room. I typed slowly at first, careful with each word as if I might wake up the pain if I wrote it too fast. But soon, the rhythm returned. Not just typing, remembering. The hallway outside the study, Aurora's voice at the door, the click of it shutting in my face, and the kettle whistling. Alone in the kitchen, I kept writing. About James. About the safe deposit box. About the folder. The USB drive. The feeling of betrayal like a second grief. And as I wrote, the pain didn't vanish, but it softened. Became something I could hold in my hands. Shape. Understand? Writing didn't fix everything, but it helped me name what had happened. It helped me reclaim my place in the story, not as the grieving widow, not as the forgotten mother, but as a woman who chose to stand up when it would have been easier to sit down and disappear. The email came late, close to midnight, when the house was still and my tea had long gone cold beside me. I almost missed it. Just a small notification in the corner of the screen. From Aurora, Reynolds at Gmail. Come subject just. Hoping. My breath caught. It had been months. Not a single word. Not even a forwarded newsletter. I clicked it open. Hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from everything else. Mom. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Richard and I are separating. I've started therapy. On my own terms. Without him, I don't expect anything, not forgiveness. Not permission. But I would like to call you sometime. If that's okay. You don't have to respond. I just hope you're well. I read it 3 times. There were no excuses. No explanations. Just a reaching. Like the soft knock of a hand, not sure it deserves to knock at all. I sat with it, letting the silence wrap around me like a shawl. I didn't feel joy. Not yet. But I didn't feel anger either. What I felt was something quieter, something closer to release. She was still out there, still finding her way. Maybe the same way I had to find mine. I opened a new message, typed slowly, like I was writing on glass. Aurora, thank you for writing. Your father always said it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I believe that's true. For you, and for me, call when you're ready. I'll be here. I pressed send, then leaned back in my chair, watching the moonlight cast soft lines across the floor. A message had arrived, and with it the first real silence I'd felt in months. Not the silence of absence, but of possibility. The house had never been this quiet, not even after James passed. Back then, the silence felt like an echo repeating everything I'd lost. But now, it felt like mine. Not empty, just still. There were no voices whispering in corners. No doors closing behind me like judgments. No cautious glances. No tension in the walls. For the first time in what felt like years, I walked barefoot down the hallway without feeling like a ghost. I opened windows and left them open. Let the breeze find its way through the curtains. Let the sun stain the hardwood floors with warmth. I brewed tea slowly, not to fill time, but because I wanted it. I sat in James's favorite chair and read a chapter aloud. Not to anyone, just because I could. I lit a candle in the kitchen, fresh linen and lemon clean. Light. Mina. The quiet no longer asked questions. It didn't echo grief. It simply held me. This house was never about the inheritance, never about property or paperwork. It was where James and I built a life. And now, it was where I would begin a new one. Not because I had to, but because I could. The soil was softer than I expected. Warm from the afternoon sun. Damp from yesterday's rain. I knelt by the edge of the garden, the very spot James once said we'd turn into a flower bed, but never quite got around to. Today, it was mine. I had tulip bulbs lined up neatly beside me, purple, white, a few soft pink. Spring wouldn't arrive for months. But planting was a promise, a whisper to the future. I'll still be here when you bloom. I pressed the first bulb into the earth, cupped the soil gently over it. Then another, and another. Each one like a quiet decision. Each one a deep breath, not to erase the past, but to grow alongside it. My hands were dirty, my knees sore, but I felt grounded in a way I hadn't in years. The grief was still there, like a low tide, but it wasn't pulling me under anymore. James would have smiled at the crooked lines I made, the way I kept glancing at the instructions and ignoring them halfway through. "You've always been stubborn with seeds," he once teased, and maybe he was right. But stubbornness can also be hope with dirt under its fingernails. By the time I finished, the sun was beginning to set. I stood back, brushing soil from my palms. The flower bed looked bare now, plain, but I knew what slept underneath. I knew what was coming. The ticket confirmation arrived in my inbox at 6:42 a.m. I stared at it for a long time, half in disbelief, half in quiet awe. Rome, Amalfi, Florence, Venice, all the names James and I used to whisper like sacred places. We'd planned this trip for years. For when we retire, he always said, but cancer never asked for permission. Now, the seats were booked, the itinerary printed, the dream no longer postponed. Not the same dream, but still a beginning. Later that morning, as the sun spilled across the kitchen, I poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then paused, smiled, and poured one back. Some habits die slowly, some you keep just because. Robert arrived at 8:00 sharp, a bag of pastries in one hand, a cautious curiosity in his eyes. "I booked the trip," I said. He blinked. "You did," I nodded. "Italy, June, 3 weeks. His face lit up something like surprise, something like pride. And I was wondering. I hesitated, and then spoke with the same tone James used when he asked me to dance in the kitchen that first summer. "Would you come with me?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at me long, kind, steady. "As a friend," I added quickly, though part of me hoped he understood it meant something softer, something deeper. "I'd be honored," he said. And just like that, the dream we'd once shelved was back on the table. Not to replace James, not to rewrite anything, but to keep walking, to keep becoming. It happened while I was folding laundry. Something so ordinary, it almost felt like background noise. But as I lifted one of James's old shirts, a blue button-down I hadn't worn or washed in months, the scent caught me off guard. His cologne, still faint, still there. I pressed the fabric to my face, closed my eyes, and just like that, the grief returned, not loud, not sharp, just present. Like a familiar ache in cold weather. I had thought I was done with this kind of crying. The sudden, quiet collapse. But healing isn't tidy. It doesn't obey milestones. It circles back. It lingers in shirt pockets, in coffee mugs, in songs on the radio. That evening, I didn't cook, didn't water the plants, just sat by the window and let it all move through me. I didn't resist, didn't scold myself. Grief isn't weakness. It's memory still alive in the softest parts of us. And that night, as I lay in bed, I didn't wish it away. I just whispered, "You are still missed. You were deeply loved. And I'm still here, trying." I used to walk past this room like it still belonged to him, like it held breath, his Not mine. James's study had been sacred territory. The leather armchair. The old globe that never spun quite right. The dusty scent of paper and quiet concentration. But one morning, I stopped at the threshold. And for the first time, I didn't pause out of grief. I paused because I knew it's time. Time to claim this space. Time to fill it with a different kind of memory. I opened the blinds. Let the light in. Moved the chair slightly, not out of disrespect, but to make room for my elbows as I leaned over the desk. I brought in a stack of blank notebooks, my laptop, a mug of tea, and I sat down where James used to sit when he scribbled notes, wrote letters, and quietly protected our future. Now it was my turn to write. The memoir had no title at first, just a folder named Draft. Then one afternoon, the name came suddenly, as if James had whispered it across time, the last legacy. Not money, not property, but the truth, the story of how I lost everything I thought I knew and somehow found myself underneath it all. Each page felt like lifting a stone. Heavy, honest, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The study was mine now, not because James was gone, but because he made sure I'd never be alone in the truth again. Some days, I still reach for the photo on my nightstand. Not James, though his picture is there too. No, I reach for the photo of her, of Aurora, in her graduation gown. Cheeks flushed, eyes lit up with pride and promise. I study that face like a stranger I used to know. So much time has passed. So much silence. Only one email since she left brief. Careful, heavy with unspoken things. And yet, I haven't taken the photo down. Why? Because I don't know what's ahead. Because I'm still a mother. Even when I've stopped hoping every day. There's a difference now. I don't wait by the phone. Don't replay old conversations, looking for where I went wrong. But I do leave the door unlocked. Not open wide, not naive. Just not shut. Maybe that's what healing is. Sometimes not charging back into brokenness, but allowing space for someone to find their own way back. If they choose to. And if they never do, then I'll still have loved her. And that love, however bruised, will still be mine. It wasn't the house, or the money, or even the recordings tucked in envelopes carefully labeled in James's handwriting. No, that wasn't the real legacy. What he gave me was something quieter, deeper, less visible, but infinitely more lasting. James gave me a truth I didn't want to see, and the strength I didn't know I had to face it. He gave me the freedom to reclaim my own life, not the life someone planned for me, but the one I chose with eyes open. He gave me the power to say, this ends with me. This cycle of silence, of pretending, of sacrificing myself for the comfort of others. James taught me, even in his absence, that love, real love, is not about control, or dependence, or keeping things tidy. Real love protects. Real love tells the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So what did he really leave me? He left me the courage to be alone without being lost, the wisdom to be kind without being naive, and the voice finally to tell my story on my own terms. This is the final legacy, and it is enough. If you're still here by the end of this story, maybe you, too, are walking your own path quietly, bravely, one truth at a time. James gave Debbie the truth she needed to live. Here at Tenacity Tales, we just hope to offer something to feel, something to remember. If this story touched something in you, a thought, a question, or maybe just a quiet feeling, you're welcome to leave a comment. Share where you're watching from, and how this story made you feel. A like, a simple subscription. That's how Tenacity Tales can keep holding space for real stories. Real hearts like Debbie's, like James's, and maybe like yours too.